All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here. More people are streaming in, but we're going to begin. I'm Sam Baker, Associate Professor of English here at UT and a founding member of the Good Systems executive team. So a bit about Good Systems, the sponsoring organization for today's Roundtable, Don't Believe the Hype, AI in Entertainment Media. Good Systems is UT's interdisciplinary research grand challenge, focused on designing ethical AI technologies for the benefit of society. It involves 120 UT researchers, over 120 researchers, across more than 30 disciplines who work together with partners in industry, government, and nonprofits to embed ethics in AI systems and to foreground shared values in human AI partnerships. And this is a grand challenge that seems to get harder every year. But also, every year we see more and more how essential it is. So we're really proud to have this set of values anchored at UT in such an institution. So today we have a great panel assembled to help us explore, in the first place, how AI is portrayed in film, TV, and video games, and how those portrayals of AI impact our perception of AI technologies. Why do they matter? What do they get right? What are they missing? Then, moreover, we'll also discuss how AI technologies are being used in creative fields and the benefits and risks of AI tools as they relate to creativity, to artists' rights, and to all the different issues that really have always abided but have been reframed and brought some cases to a new crisis by the advent of AI in the creative arts. So in order to pursue this, we have our panelists. Andrew Augustine is an assistant professor of practice in the Arts and Entertainment Technologies Department at UT Austin. He's a 2D illustrator and a game designer with a rich history of conceptualizing and creating notable characters, notably for The Sims 3 Pets. As the founder of Notion Games LLC, he's launched unique titles like Team Notion and the Super Ubi Island series. And Professor Augustine has also been recognized on the Forbes 30 Under 30 and Black Enterprise Modern Man lists, and he's a contributor to Innovative Gaming and Esports, Volume 1. Rakita Irvin is the Director of Community Education at the Austin Film Society, where she oversees the organization's educational initiatives, including AFS Creative Careers, a workforce development program for emerging creators. She's produced award-winning TV series airing on CNN, VH1, NBC Universal, and A&E networks during her 20-year career as a writer for broadcast and digital content. From Los Angeles to Austin, Rakita stepped into the educational space to inspire the next generation of creative professionals. Jeff Marslett is an animator, director, writer, producer, and actor. He grew up as a cowboy with an interest in physics and worked both in construction and at the Naval Research Laboratory before becoming a filmmaker. His films often revolve around the romance of connection and the way that exploring your universe changes you and the place you're exploring. He's written software, alternatively used other software, and utilized numerous analog and digital techniques to produce unique and original animation and image processing. And then finally, Suzanne Scott is Associate Professor and Associate Chair of the Radio, Television, Film Department, RTF, at UT Austin. She's the author of Fake Geek Girls, Fandom, Gender, and the Convergence Culture Industry, and the co-editor of Sartorial Fandom, Fashion, Beauty, Culture, and Identity. And previously with Good Systems, Suzanne, along with myself and Paul Toprak, was a co-founder of the Bad AI and Beyond project, which led to a memorable festival about how the entertainment media represent AI, and to a co-authored essay in AI and Society on that topic, as well as other productions coming soon. So thank you all, panelists, for sharing your insights with us today. You all bring unique perspectives, and I'm looking forward to a dynamic conversation with you and also afterwards. We're going to run about 90 minutes, but then we're going to hang out with snacks and just talk for the last part, all of us together in reception mode for the last part of the session. as one of the panelists was heard to say earlier, these panels are really nice because they help us all to connect across the campus and across the city with people we might not normally see, even talk sometimes to close colleagues who are down the hall, but you don't get a chance to talk to about your work and about important topics like we have today. So it's exciting to all be here together, and with no further ado, let's dive into the conversation. So here is our first question. And I think, Andrew, let's begin with you and move this right down the panel. If you could each tell us a bit about your personal journey in connection to the topic of AI entertainment media. How are AI technologies and AI hype impacting your work?
I want to make sure is my mic working? Yeah? Okay. All right. Well, I'm still kind of new with the whole AI thing. I kind of keep up with it a lot. But as a owner of a studio, we kind of develop games independently. We have a small team, so I'm used to kind of wearing various hats throughout different aspects of the production. So I'm usually like doing art, or I might be marketing for the day, or doing graphic design for any kind of different thing. So what I've been using AI for, though, is to more so kind of help with like writing. Right, that's probably my least favorite aspect of developing, like writing scripts or anything for any kind of maybe cutscenes for a game or something like that. But beyond that, we've played around with a little bit of AI for like some visual creation, like ChatGPT and Midjourney and things like that. We don't really dive into it too much because me and my team, we're artists first, so we kind of are a little offended that we could just generate art off of a little, we kind of feel like we've been learning how to draw our lives and everything, and you could just type a little thing and have some amazing art. Like, it's kind of annoying to us, but we've used it to kind of come up with quick concepts. But that's about as far as we really touched on AI. We try to keep everything, as human as possible, I guess, for lack of better terms.
My journey started, I got into the film and TV industry around the time of Y2K. And that was a time when systems were predicted to crash as the year approached 2000. So my first job was at a Hollywood studio, and I remember a lot of our TV shows kind of centered around Y2K, and it was exaggerated, and it was handled in a very interesting way with a lot of fear in the mix. And it turned out to be not as bad as it was predicted. So I feel like we're in a similar moment with AI, and there are a lot of different perspectives about it. Writers and actors recently went on a strike to ensure that workers remain in control of the technology. So there's a lot happening. There's always a lot of constant change, and I'm on the side of thinking that education, training, everything from standards and regulation should be a part of the conversation.
Am I on? Yeah, hello. It wasn't AI, but my introduction to this universe was back in 2007. I wrote a software for image processing for my first animated feature, and I would still say we're not at AI. I'm not sure the intelligence part is really even in anything we're calling AI. We have an elaborate engine that's using algorithms and information, and it's doing machine learning, but I'm not sure about intelligence yet. So I would say what I did with my Swerve tools, 15 years ago or more, I'm getting old, is similar, just allowing the computer to create shortcuts and to be used as a tool. So I have a certain for the ability of tools to pick up some of the work that we'd otherwise have to do, and I was able to make a feature film on a much smaller budget than competing feature films were being made at the time or really ever. So I don't hate that, but I also come at this from a side of saying AI is amazing for healthcare, for engineering. If I was to sit down and have cancer and I could type in I have this kind of cancer and an AI solves that in 5 minutes for me, I'm not going to be sad about that. I'm not going to feel like I didn't earn that. I'm not going to feel like, oh, that's not as good as if a person solved it, because I want the cancer solved. But since we're in the space of art, I think we really have to ask ourselves, why do we even like art in the first place, and what are we asking for art? And I do think I'm coming to this from the standpoint of saying that part of what we love about art is that it's difficult. Part of what we love about art is that people make it. So it's novel and it's interesting right now when you can put yourself into Viking garb as your Facebook avatar because of AI. But ultimately, I wonder a lot as this becomes more a byproduct of the giant plagiarism engine that we're calling AI. Do people even want that? Before I even go into the ethics of should it take away jobs, do people even want to see that? Or do you start to look at all digital images as having less value because none of them were as hard for anyone to make? So that's where I'm coming from.
Great. Hi, am I on? Great. So as Sam mentioned, we collaborated with another colleague on a project through the Good Systems Challenge that was focused on sort of whether or not media representations of AI were shaping popular perceptions of AI. So I'd be happy to talk about that on the panel as well. But my own kind of scholarly interest, I'm a media studies scholar. I am specifically a fan studies scholar. So I'm very interested in sort of digital fan cultures and fan communities of practice. So I'm interested, the AI conversation, we don't really think about this, right? We think about like actors and creatives, but like fans are a creative class, right? They are creators of content as well. They are not protected by unions, unfortunately. And so I'm very interested in how fans are grappling with these questions of AI, particularly from a couple different angles. First, thinking about fan-generated content generated through AI. So thinking about the kind of legal designation of fan works like fan fiction and fan art as transformative, and what it means when we start sort of building those communities and cultures with AI-generated content of fan art and fan fiction. I'm also interested in how fans are using AI to, say, like chat with characters for hours at a time using chatbots, or thinking about how they might, be modeling Taylor Swift's voice to give them daily affirmations before they start their day. I'm also interested fundamentally in sort of how fan relationships to objects change, or maybe just audience or our relationships to objects change when we're thinking about like reviving dead performers or actors in creative works, right? So Rebecca Williams has this lovely concept of post-object fandom, which is like what happens when your show gets canceled, what happens when your celebrity that you've been following dies. And I think we're entering into a really interesting period where fans' negotiation to those objects is going to change fundamentally. And so I'm interested in all these kind of different angles to think of it also about how fans maybe are like a proto-AI, like an analog AI, in terms of how they were producing content and remixing content well before the computers were. So that's sort of where I'm coming at this from a couple different angles, but predominantly around this notion of thinking about fans and their relationship to these emergent technologies.
I want to break into my imitation of the AI that will sing anything that you put into it in Frank Sinatra's voice. Have you heard this? Would anybody like to follow up on anything that was said? Because those were such interesting, provocative opening comments. I've got more questions, but is anybody just thinking that they want to leap right in? And
I feel like there was several things interesting that were said, but I guess sticking to the question. I mean, that fan creation thing is actually really interesting because I think that could be an avenue of. I mean, you have fan fiction and all kinds of things, so it'd be cool to kind of hear Michael Jackson do a song again, and like some kind of AI. But I don't know if. I guess for me, I'm coming from the side of industry, right, where I'm more so thinking about jobs, So I'm, fan stuff, amazing, great. Go ahead, jump in. Let's go.
Well, let me be really clear. I also am really concerned about like fan labor being compensated labor too. So I am treating this as kind of like they are not officially kind of acclimated into industry and don't have similar industry protections. But I think you and I actually have very similar concerns maybe around questions of like labor and compensation and all that good stuff.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, my experience with studios in like animation or game design, studios are always trying to cut costs. I mean, even me as a owner of a studio, I'm trying to cut costs too, right? So I just kind of like, unfortunately, my writer, if you're watching this, I'm sorry, man. I don't use them anymore because I don't have to, And I feel like that is just going to be kind of like a snowball turning into a big, big snowball. Like, I don't even know, But like, I think it's just gonna multiply. I mean, if it's allowing my studio to do more with less, but that whole less aspect is kind of cutting into, people having job security and stuff.
I think we had a conversation about this earlier and have slightly different perspectives. I agree about efficiency. It's great to have tools to be efficient, but you just can't replace that authenticity, right? So I see, the new technology and people, working together. And there are times where maybe you do want to use, a tool because it's more efficient, but there's other times where you need, kind of like that real authenticity to the table, like thinking about voiceover, for example. There are so many apps and different tools that you can use that are very close, to kind of that human experience, but you can still tell, right?
I think I fall closer to your side on this because I think it's great to do more for less. That's how I started even my film. I was like, how do I do this without this money? But I think I draw a little bit of a line and think of it in a closed system because at some point less is actually bad if less is removing. And I think bad from losing the people's jobs, but even aesthetically, I think bad. At some point, like if we wonder why AI gets hands wrong, AI gets hands wrong because everywhere it copied from was getting hands wrong. It's not because like AI doesn't understand hands. It's that where it came. So like when I did Mars, or when I think about really great uses, there's a program called EBSynth, which isn't really AI, but it's doing some similar things. If it's a closed system of me or my employee or my friend or my collaborator making art, inserting it into the system, and then the system allows me to do more with that art I created, I'm excited. And then it makes it better. If it's to say, instead of now having my collaborator insert anything, I'm just going to ask for art, I'm not as interested in seeing it all of a sudden. And I know that that's not even an aesthetic thing. That's a judgment my brain makes. And I love animals and weird animals. If you rewind me 10 years ago, anytime there's a picture of some crazy animal someone found in the jungle or the desert, I want to look at it. I don't want to look at any of that anymore because the internet's just full of ones people made up with AI. So now I don't care about any of them anymore. And I think that while we keep trying to do more with less, it's like the old ideas of making a robot look more like a person, and it scares us. If we make the imagery too good where I can't tell the AI from the real photo, do I just throw it all away as far as interest? And so I guess I'm saying there's even three things. There's the moral issue, but I'm also even, as a consumer, as a fan base, I don't know how we feel once everything seems easy. Do we want to look for something hard? And then what is that?
Yeah, and I would say, I think this point about authenticity is interesting, right? Especially because I'm thinking about, it's 10 p.m. on a Friday. I don't want to go search a fan fiction archive for a particular story. I'm just going to plug into ChatGPT, give me a story where Kirk and Spock fall in love on this planet, right? And it can spit out a version of that, right? But I also think the question here is about there is a human factor, right? There is a human factor in terms of and there's also a literacy factor, right? In terms of thinking about what these things are being trained on, right? And so if it's been trained exclusively on fan fiction from a fan fiction archive, it might sort of understand the sort of writing tropes and common themes and the ways that fans interpret particular narratives, right? If it's just pulling from the official media text, it might be missing an entire level of kind of fanish interpretive practices that are actually really fundamental to creating pleasure for the people reading that piece of fan fiction. So I think the other layer here for me is always authenticity, even when we talk about AI generated art, is for me always about what is it training off of, right? And so that's a question that I think is really important to ask, because that can radically reimagine what gets spit out at the other end, and then the sort of pleasures or sort of feeling of alienation maybe that you're getting from that piece of art.
And it doesn't have, in your exact example, it has all those things, but what it lacks is the weird other thing that an individual who might have read that and created had their own weird hang-ups that they inserted into this fan piece that then I watched and I either was repelled by or interested in and becomes exciting. That doesn't exist.
Yeah, I don't love the word hang-up, but everything else I agree with what you said.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agree. I think it's important to not get lazy and rely on it. We have to continue to learn about it and evolve with it.
I don't know why I have a feeling that y'all are talking about the now. I'm kind of thinking more about where it's going to go. In AI, just a year ago, I kind of first heard about, I forgot which one it was, one of the image joints or whatever. But now it's miles better just within a year. So You know, yeah, the cause of concerns of where the art is coming from or where the information is coming from, but they're going to get to a point where AI is going to be able to create in a kind of more, I guess, original way, right? It's just going to get better and better from here, you know. And what happens when that happens, like for instance, if I know there's that human element, right? Like humans created AI and humans can work with AI, but I mean, what if we're already at the point where you just type in a prompt? I just feel like what are we doing to work with it at this point? Like, what is the human element coming in?
I think it's coming in on the side of education. I mean, we just learned that there's a couple of universities that have AI as an undergrad degree. And I think it's University of Pennsylvania and, you know, Carnegie Mellon or something like that. So we have to continue to like learn about it. And, you know, we are, like you said, we are the creators. And AI is generative. So it kind of generates. So we're behind it. So we have to continue to learn about it and study and have engineers.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so like somebody had brought up a point when I was talking about this before, like the Industrial Revolution, like, you know, they get rid of a lot of jobs, but new jobs spawn from, you know, maybe you need operators of this, that, and the other. But I'm like, well, what is the jobs that are being created here?
I don't think they exist. I think we're like, you know, thinking in the future and training for jobs that we don't even know what they are yet. We're still kind of like learning about them. And technology, I mean, I could give an example of just kind of seeing some evolution of technology and how you just pivot, right? So I'm on the side of being a producer, and I traditionally work with editors. So I remember, like, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, I walked by like this edit bay, and I noticed that it looked different from what I was used to seeing. And it was a smaller room, and there was one person in there. And I asked, like, well, who's that person in the room? And they're like, well, they're the predator. And I'm like, the predator? So they combined like producer and editor to kind of create this position. And it didn't mean that I lost my job. It didn't mean that editors on the shows that I worked on lost their job. It just meant that they had like another position and another role to, like, you know, work on smaller budget shows. So in terms of like thinking about losing jobs and things like that, I think we're just gonna continue to pivot and learn and grow and evolve. And, you know, will there be some casualties? Will people, I mean, you talked earlier about like how you're like, oh, I don't need to use that person, I have AI. But that may happen. But I think as far as like industry as a whole, we're gonna continue to see like new jobs, you know, new jobs become available and people will learn about them.
I know, Jeff, are you buying this? Can you use
I actually don't buy it at all. No, I don't. I think jobs are going to be lost, and I don't think that this is. I actually don't think entertainment's going to be the first line to go. I think that, like I said, I think there's an actual safety that we have as, I'm going to say entertainers, but whatever you want to call what we do, people call it media creation, entertainment, whatever. I think that we have a firewall in that if people don't really like it, they can turn towards other things. I mean, this is anecdotal, but I'm old, so the number of my friends who now have kids that are going to college that want to do musical theater is up like tenfold. I taught at Carnegie Mellon for a little while. They got great musical theater. They're all going there and stuff. If you want to get into a growth industry, I think doing things in person in a room is actually going to be a growth industry because people are going to get tired of looking at, you know, the Marvel's CG universe and want an alternative. But I think the jobs are going to go. I think we have this across all industries, and AI not even included, that labor, if we want to bemoan the fact that labor doesn't have as much power in this country as it once had, a large part of the reason is because labor doesn't have as much value as it once had. Once upon a time, you needed an army of people to do something on a large scale. And these tools are really cool because they're allowing individuals and smaller groups of people to do something on a large scale without that human power. But I guess what I'd say is the sentence I just said is that I'm removing the need for human power, and these tools will do that. So at what point do you have, I don't mean it in this way, but it's going to sound like, so at what point do you have a bunch of people who we don't have a need for? So suddenly if you have movies, which now take several thousand people to make, and I need 9 people to make that movie, well, several thousand people just lost a job. And there are new things coming, but are there several thousand new things? So yeah, so I guess I'm not totally buying the hope.
So they venture into other industries, VR production, where there are like, you know, new jobs and new technologies that, you know, we're still learning about. So I guess my argument is that even like everywhere you're sending them to, like they're like, oh, actually we got rid of all that because we have AI over here too. I mean, I think that's machines did that. I mean, like how many of you have ordered food by touching a screen lately?
Like we don't even need someone to make your burrito anymore.
Yeah, that's how kind of how I feel too. Like I go and we talked about this before. Go Walmart, Target. I don't know how many times I even interact with a human outside of somebody checking my receipt at this point, and that's not even AI, right? That's just a machine where they make us kind of check out our own.
Exactly.
So but go ahead. I'm
I
sorry.
was going to say, both of y'all would be upset if you went to Target and yes, there are machines, but something happened to the machine. You'd be looking for a human to help solve the problem.
I already try and go to the human. I mean, I already skip the machine and go to the human, not even to solve the problem, but just so I can smile and say, like, how are you today? Yeah.
Yeah, but honestly, how many times does that really happen for me? Like I go check out my little bag of chips and I'm gone, right? And
I literally say hi to everyone I walk by every day. I mean, I do. And I live in Colorado now. I used to live here, and people don't really say hi back as much, and it makes me sad on a literally daily basis when people just, like, you say hi and they avert their eyes. And I'm like, well, I mean, I wasn't going to attack you. I'm just, like, saying hi. But
That's another point, that human element.
I mean, even Amazon, like I'm at a point where I'd rather wait 2 days for something to come in than to just go down the street and pick it up, So it's like I do feel like AI is just going to disrupt a whole bunch of things, and it's okay if jobs are taken away as long as there are new jobs created. And of course, there are going to be new jobs created, but again, like you mentioned, if you get rid of 1,000 jobs, will AI create?
And I think let's not write off too. I mean, I'm also, maybe we don't need to work as much. I mean, I mean this, like, now hippie cowboy Jeff is going to say whatever now, but there's this dream that automation and AI, if it makes things easier, what if I didn't work 40 hours a week, but I worked 10 hours a week and got to spend time enjoying myself? So we need to figure out how unfortunately, monetization drives directions of everything, but it would be great if, I'm actually okay if some of the jobs get lost, and that means that I could do other things.
That's not the way history has been.
No, it's not.
Though.
No, it is not.
All right, that's.
I 100% agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the point I wanted to make, which is like the efficiency conversation. Maybe I'm just being deeply cynical, but I don't think that time is going to be brought back to people.
I think you're being deeply realistic.
Yeah. And I also just feel, I don't know. I mean, again, you're all more equipped because you're on the creative side of the industry to sort of talk through the realities of hiring and labor and all of those sorts of things. But just in terms of like sort of efficiency and tools and that sort of rhetoric around AI, I just feel like there is, I guess what I'll say is this. I think that it's because this technology, as you note, is developing so rapidly, I worry somewhat that educational context can keep up with that speed, right? I mean, I'm currently in a chair position and I know how long it takes to get curriculum approved and into the catalog, right? So for as much as there might be a demand or a desire, and even an institution like UT that is so focused on AI right now, right? There are just realities of kind of adapting to this kind of marketplace and setting people who are entering this workforce up for the kinds of careers that they might have. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice when we just assume that people will kind of automatically adapt to these new kind of, institutional or cultural or employment conditions, right? And so that's where some of my anxieties, I guess, lie, is this idea of like, yes, it might make more jobs in new contexts, but how are we actively training people for those jobs?
Yeah, that's a good point, because then you have to think about also standards, regulation around it. There's a lot of different elements that go into making it functioning.
And how are we training them to use these things ethically, which is, again, the conversation that I think often gets lost in a lot of these efficiency conversations.
Right, because the one of the problems with AI, I think Jeff referred to it earlier as AIs as plagiarism machines. One of the main worries is that, particularly as it becomes more and more possible to control the training sets that the AIs are working off of, that one can, in all innocence, say, "Oh, I've been enjoying reading these Oz books to my children. I will produce I'll train an AI to make a new Oz book that's customized for them." Like, very clever, but actually, the Oz books don't have copyright, but like, is it really right to do that?
And we as artists already, we are plagiarism engines. I mean, I'm an artist. I look at things. I recreate. I take things from what I looked at. I'll be the first to admit that. But once the machine just does it and does it easily, like, wow, you made your plagiarism engine like so much more efficient. And I don't know.
Well, one thing I wonder about with AI myself often as somebody who works in that part of the entertainment industry we call college teaching, right? Where I'm always trying to entertain my class, and we're reading, great entertaining works of yesteryear, which we emphasize have value for their historical, right? The historical truths they teach us, and the crucial skills around language use that they promulgate, but also we teach them because they're a lot of fun and very entertaining. But there's a sense that sometimes that a lot of the issues that we see are issues that were already brought to us by the internet. Just the ubiquity of information, the ease of access for a corpus like all the Oz books, like boom, right at your fingertips, right? And that AI is the name we give to manipulating readily available information in a fast way. But in fact, we were already doing that before we had AI. AI might represent the moment of hitting a limit and saying, oh, well, what we've been doing really is something machines could do, at which point we could build a new kind of culture around information. And I look to fan culture as a place for this to happen.
Well, so my mother's very disappointed because I'm a failed lawyer. I was supposed to become a lawyer, and instead I'm doing this now. And I think the word plagiarism, I think we're in a room full of people in the university system. It's one of those words that kind of gets everyone immediately on edge. I also think derivative is another word, right? So you can say like, yes, I build my creative works out of all of the references and all of the things that I love and all of the sort of, like, again, creatives and fans are very similar in this way, right? They're building off of a corpus, as you say, Sam, right? A corpus of references, a corpus of media objects, and they're creating something new. For me, what's really important there, though, is that many fan works fall under this category of fair uses and transformative works, right? So like, do I think that there could be transformative uses of AI? Yes. Do I think that matters? It matters greatly what corpus they're drawing off of and how they're being prompted, right? So like I could say that fan communities and culture work like AI works now, which is to say every fan has their own sort of self-contained library of references and texts that they sort of have internally in their brains, and someone might give them a prompt to write a new story or to generate a new piece of fan art, and they will go do that. And that is a fairly equivalent description of what generative AI is doing, right? The distinction is like that element of transformativity in terms of thinking about like infusing something with like a new meaning or a message and or commentary, right? And so that's the legal designation, right? That a lot of fan work is allowed to use copyrighted materials because it falls under those transformative uses. Where I think it gets tricky is when we are just utilizing AI, generative AI, to just like shortcut our way to generate something that was like, again, could have been generated by a human, but is again like, is the prompting the transformative intervention, I guess is the question I would ask.
And I think something Andrew said earlier that resonates with exactly what you're saying is it's kind of easy, or not easy, it's possible now for me to look at this and kind of see what feels like it's derivative, what feels like it's, but what is it going to be in 5 years? Yeah. And like what that transformative thing is, I don't even have a frame of reference to know what that might look like in 5 years.
It's going to get to a point where we can't even tell. I'm just being honest. Like it's going to happen, and it's going to happen quick, right? Like I just saw a video Marquez Brownlee had posted, I think a few days ago, about like a AI video generator program. I forgot. It was like I forget. It starts with an S, I think. But it's amazing. Like it's ridiculous. Like and again, he was showcasing like where it was a year ago and where it is now. And then of course, I mean, we can only use our imaginations to understand where it's going to be, like you said, 5 years from now. So I mean, it's happening and it's going to happen. Right now, we're talking about the conversation we're having today is going to be outdated by next week. Because like
sure.
It's how fast it's moving. So if we're talking about where AI is right now, it's not going to even matter by the time this video is even posted. So I'm thinking about where it's going. You know what I mean? And we're not going to be able to tell. Like we're just not. Like there's going to be a human painting, human-made creation, and there's going to be an AI creation, and we're going to be like, I don't know. I can't tell.
Yeah, but I guess the question around this is like, if the U.S. Copyright Office seems to be hinging a lot of at least their exploratory conversations, right? Not policies necessarily, but exploratory conversations have all been about to what degree does human involvement need to be present in order for something to be copyrighted? And then the secondary layer of those questions is, should copyrighted materials be allowed to be used to generate new things without those copyright holders' permissions, right? Let's say they're owned by a studio, they're owned by somebody else, right? So those are the two layers. But I think what's interesting is the humanity is oddly being centered in some of the legal conversations around this. So the question starts to become I agree with you. Will we be able to tell the difference? Maybe not. Legally and in terms of how people are getting paid and or how industries are making money, that's a somewhat separate question, I think, right? So they might want to offset their entire labor pool and use everything through AI, but will they be able to copyright that thing?
Well, we should remember corporations didn't always exist.
Correct.
And corporations existed for these same moral quagmires. So.
Well, I mean, that's kind of what we saw with the strike, with the actors' strike, right? So they petitioned to grant approval so that you can't just take their likeness and just use it for whatever. So all of those conversations are happening as things evolve.
I think a big question to me is, as a society, as individuals, right, as consumers, do we care about the quality of the entertainment media that we ingest, right? We'd all like to say yes, but do we really, right? And I worry about this with the AI that I see on YouTube being consumed by my young children when they sneak away and do the thing that they're not supposed to do, which is watch random things. They call it random things. That's their name for the streams of YouTube videos, right, that come to them randomly when you search Peppa Pig. You don't actually get much, copyrighted, beautifully produced Peppa Pig. What you get is random AI-generated regurgitations of pictures of Peppa Pig kind of moving somehow on the screen in a way that is much more attractive to 4 and 5-year-olds, it can seem, than actual Peppa Pig, right? So the AI algorithm is producing a collage video of kids' cartoon characters that is objectively terrible. It's not winning any awards. No one's going to be mooning over it like they do over Bluey, but the kids like it. Just like sometimes when I'm looking for, sports news late at night, I can go 5-10 minutes reading sports news before I realize, oh, I just read 5 or 6 AI-generated articles about, baseball spring training, just based off of the one real article. But as a consumer, I catch myself not caring. And that to me really is a situation that might cry out for a high-level ethical intervention where society says, no, we care. We are going to have these standards, whether it's about children's programming on YouTube or news.
And I think I love that you're talking about education and you're talking about fans. If we're talking about art, old man Jeff up here doesn't matter for art. Education of who's young and coming, those kids, what they learn. Fans are ultimately the ones that are going to decide if art is commercially viable or not, because if they don't like it, it goes away, and if they like it, it spreads. So there's a strange way, too, where I think even like you were saying objectively this Peppa Pig isn't good. Is that even objective? Because objectively is in the it's, who's viewing changes the outcome in that sense. So what does a kid who grows up looking at AI think is objectively good or bad?
It's certainly the case that the university professors who work on curating the arts over the past 50 years have systematically de-emphasized judgment. Right. Something that's taught, right? There's a a default relativism that is taught as the proper stance to have if you're a professor, that you explain how this thing came about, but you stop short of saying, well, and this is better than that.
Yeah, and Sam, you have a reference to compare it, right? The younger kids don't.
Well, so this is interesting. Your Peppa Pig example is interesting because, and I realize we completely kind of hopped over the question of representation of AI in media. So I'm going to try to get us back there through this answer. But I also will just say, when we think about, common representations of AI in entertainment media, they have to be cinematic, right? Whether they're in cinema or video games or television or whatever, right? So we are often sort of eliding and not representing the elements of AI that might be equally pernicious as killer robots, or maybe more harmful to society than killer robots, but are not particularly like spectacular to watch. They don't make for good TV, right? So like algorithmic bias is not like if you're watching an episode of like Law and Order or SVU about algorithmic bias, it's not as interesting, right? And so part of this is like it's less to me. There's two questions in your discussion, Sam. There's like aesthetically whether your child can differentiate between real quality Peppa Pig and poor aesthetic, like poor man's Peppa Pig, I guess, aesthetically speaking. There's that question, but then there's also the question of like, how are you getting to those AI videos to begin with, right? And that's just like the algorithm, like leading you from like authentic Peppa Pig to knockoff Peppa Pig, right? And so those sorts of things, again, are elements of this AI conversation that I think when we talk about the importance of media representations of AI, you know, and what impact they can have. Some of this is that, like, yes, we have historically looked at good and bad robots kind of dominate kind of cultural understandings of like what AI is and how it's functioning, at least representationally in media industries, right? But ultimately, we all know that that is only one small sliver of what AI is actually being utilized for. And I think part of this comes down to people can see that those representations are not realistic necessarily. And there is a kind of desire for more realistic representations. But fundamentally, when you're talking about making fictional entertainment media, they just don't play on screen in the same way. So I think that these are two separate kind of conversations, but they kind of come together for me in that way.
And I think we probably, like, you're on the digital side of things. So, you know, for you, it's efficiency and, you know, video games, things like that. We're already kind of like trained to and accustomed to kind of seeing that sort of thing. And on the side of like maybe kind of narrative, you know, of what we're doing, docs and things like that, it's about authenticity.
Rikita, I wanted to start with you, but just ask the question of the panel. Do you see a return to the face-to-face as something that people seem to want as consumers? Like, you know, you're programming film series, you know, working with a public, developing a public. You know, do you see this evidence for this like thirst for actual, you know, kind of anchoring in the human that people speculate is going to be a result of our high-tech culture? Or actually, do you find that a lot of people saying to you, like, hey, could you program a channel for us to watch at home? We don't want to interact with other people.
I mean, look around the room. I think there absolutely is a return. I mean, how many of you would have driven and parked at UT and come to this panel if I wasn't real, but I was a better informed than Jeff Marslet actually is on AI? You could have found an AI that knows more about AI than I do. Would you have come and watched that on a screen?
Maybe this is the university trying to fight against the tide of automation.
We got all these suckers to come fight with us. I mean, I think there will be a return to at least, even if Jeff's a dumbass and I'm wrong, you'd rather sit and watch a human being come up here and have some opinion about it and be wrong, I think, than an AI. Maybe that will change. I mean, I do want to put the asterisk next to that may change, but I think just the fact that they're even here means there's some return to it.
Or would you rather see a human actor in the films that you watch, or do you want to see a synthetic actor? That's a term, you know, now. So,
I mean, would you, if you were making a film and I said you could get Brad Pitt and Taylor Swift for your film, how much would you pay to have them be in your film? What do you find that worth? It would be something. I mean, nobody has the kind of money in this room. I assume nobody in this room has the kind of money to hire them. But let's say you did, and you hired them to be in your movie. People would pay and go see your movie. Now, fast forward 10 years from now, where I write a check to a corporation and license the concept of Brad Pitt and Taylor Swift, and I make that film. How much is that worth to you? And now that 10,000 kids scattered around the country could each make a movie with Taylor Swift and Brad Pitt this month, do you even care about the one that comes out? So if it becomes so easy to generate these images, we're going to want the one that's human being in the room with you because that is more exclusive.
Sounds like a video game.
Will they authorize it? Will they authorize the use of it?
I don't know.
New actors?
I think our generation is not going to matter very soon anyway. Like, I mean, we like if you growing up with this stuff, that's all you just what you're exposed to. I mean, we sound like old heads right now because we're like, with human element and all that, but like kids don't care. At the end of the day, like if you I'm sorry, one second. The YouTube example. Who brought up YouTube? You brought up YouTube. I don't know about the AI generated videos, but I know I grew up with like Disney animated films and hand drawn traditional animation, and my kids are watching the most basic animated like I don't know, and they love it. Like it's the stuff that blows up. Like so, we're thinking about quality and all this stuff, and I don't think they care. Like if they're exposed to it and they grow up with it, then that's just what they are. I mean, look at TikTok and everything. Like that's the content that's hot.
Do you think the medium matters? Like, would they care if it's a different medium and not, video games and?
Do I think the medium matters?
Yeah, like and like would they care if they were to go see like a kind of a narrative film and it's all synthetic actors?
I don't know. I mean, I just don't.
Not animated.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm looking from a perspective of like, from my opinion, a lot of the content that's even popular today is less quality than what I grew up on. Right, from music, I think the lyrics in music aren't witty or I don't think they really come up with anything creative like that. Music production, I can press 3 keys and repeat it, throw 808 on it, and it's a hit. Like it's not like. So I don't think the quality of things is necessarily matters as much as we think. I mean, if we go back to the days of like the painters, Picasso and everything, their art is amazing, but we don't care about that as much. Like I think it just depends on what's popular with the times. And I think AI is popular with the times, and I think the next generation will grow up using it in some way, and then it would be the wave. I mean, the human element is already kind of not mattering as much because, I mean, when I was growing up, I'm used to seeing kids outside playing all the time. I hardly see anybody hooping these days or doing anything. They're at home playing the video games,
Yeah, I mean, I agree about embracing it. I again, back to like education around it and using it. I see a lot of written things that come in applications, and it's apparent that is AI. So it's like, okay, well, that's fine to use AI, but are you using it in a way that it doesn't feel like it's AI? Like it feels like it's your voice. So I think it's going to be important to. I still kind of value authenticity, and I think the measure of AI is authenticity right now.
Well, I'm teaching a digital remix culture class this semester, so I am an old person. I'll crumble to dust at the end of the panel. But to your point, no, I think you're right, But I was talking to my students a couple weeks ago about, because they're all aspiring media makers, right? Across a range of mediums, film, TV, digital content, et cetera, right? And I posed this question when we were talking about AI and copyright. And I said, well, so how are you using it? And I said, we can say, how is a friend of a friend using it? I'm not asking you to tell me whether you are plagiarizing all your papers using ChatGPT. How are your friends of your friends using it? And granted, next generation might be a totally different story, right? But I think this generation, it was interesting to me because I expected to hear a lot more about how they were utilizing it for things like pre-production, post-production, thinking about kind of conceptualization, art, all of these things. They're really and again, this is a small sample, but they were kind of really just using it as a tool. So I'm checking my screenplay for spelling errors, or sort of in a Grammarly kind of sense, right? I'm utilizing this to do sort of pre-visualization on some things, but then I eventually want to go in and do it myself. And one of my students sort of said, well, I mean, he kind of just shrugged and said, well, I mean, we're the humanities. It's in the name. And I thought that was very beautiful. And I also was sort of a little bit shocked because I also held this kind of idea of and again, this is this generation. Next generation where all of this stuff is completely normalized, they're about to leave college, right? So they've only had it for the past year in a meaningful way. I think attitudes will change. I think it will be a tool like a typewriter or a computer. I think that part of that though is thinking about how we do or do not value institutionally, culturally, these things like the human element or sort of I think that's going to be some of the deciding factor here is how they get employed as tools and to what degree they get employed as tools versus full content creation. that spectrum, I think, is still going to get fought over for a while, I would think.
I agree. I mean, I definitely see it being useful as a tool. And, that's how we're using it and how, the emerging creatives in my program are using it. And it's efficient. And it's helping to, make the process easier. But we play a role, too. We're using it for research. And then we go and write and, things like that. So.
Also, all the old folks are still going to be at the top of the ladders for just a little while longer, making some decisions at the corporate level. So
I still write all my screenplays with a pen in a notebook. When I teach students, no, I'm saying that because I think I'm still going to be the old man that keeps, this is the hill I'm going to die on. I think there's a value to things that are rare. I think we did that with diamonds and gold. I think we've done that with everything. We like things. I'll just use Taylor Swift because, to be honest, I can't recognize a Taylor Swift song. I don't know any, but I'm going to use her as an example because she's done a phenomenal job of being very popular. People are paying thousands of dollars to go sit in a room 5,000 feet, and probably it's not a full mile, but a very long distance away in an uncomfortable chair for hours to watch Taylor Swift. They're paying that money because they can be in a room with the actual Taylor Swift. They wouldn't pay that money to watch Taylor Swift on their VR headset. So I think there is something. I mean, I'll go into teacher mode for a minute. How many of you have ever gotten like a fancy notebook as a gift from someone for graduating or a special event? Has anyone ever gotten that? How many of you put that notebook in your drawer and never wrote in it because you were afraid to deface that notebook because it was a special notebook and you didn't want to ruin it with a dumb idea? Right? Did that happen? The flip side is powerful, too. If you pick that notebook up and you say, I'm going to write a screenplay, I'm going to draw a picture, and you do it in the notebook, you will automatically feel that that thing you wrote is more important because you defaced that fancy notebook with it. I think some version of that will continue to exist. That because I think everyone's right that this AI is coming and people are going to grow up using it. But what it's going to do is make something else rarer and more special. I don't know what that is, but it creates a new diamond, so to speak. And I do think that's human nature. We want the thing that other people can't necessarily get.
I mean that. Okay, I'm not going to say what I was originally going to say. I'm going to say something else. It kind of makes me think of like maybe a decade ago. I remember being at a comic convention, and there was an argument between a digital artist and there was still at that point there was comic artists who were drawing traditionally on paper and everything. That was a debate. Like, is digital art, right? Now, like, I don't see a debate. Like, my students, they all draw on iPads, right? I don't see. I hardly see any students coming with a notebook. And even if they did, to me, it's not necessarily appreciated, right? I was a traditional artist when I went to a program here at UT, and I was drawing on pencil and paper still, and they was like, "You slowing us down, bro. Like, you need to go ahead and, you're gonna catch up with the time." So I learned how to do digital art, and now I don't even touch paper, for my art anymore because I mean, it's just the wave. I mean, I get the artifact kind of idea, mindset, but I mean,
well, on our side of things, I remember when we saw the first movie shot on the iPhone. And for us, it's always like, okay, what is the latest technology? We're always looking for the latest. And the movie looked great, but people are still using traditional cameras that are continuing to evolve. And, you have all these tools, right? Like, they can coexist and they can all evolve in their own way. So.
This has been a great conversation. I want to get the audience involved. So I think what we're going to do now is move a few minutes early to some closing statements, take some questions from the crowd because y'all are so engaging. I think that will be a really exciting part of our time together. So I guess if we could start down with Suzanne and just just give us your kind of closing thought on where you've come to in the conversation so far, just ahead of the grand finale, which will be the Q&A.
All right, no pressure. I'll say this. I think the sort of common phrase like representation matters is real, right? Representation does matter. I also think that because I study fans, I am very keenly aware that fans are not just injected with ideology that mainstream media entertainment gives to them, right? They're critical consumers. They may be activist consumers. They're creative consumers. One of the reasons I love studying and thinking about fans is I think they break down a lot of the binaristic thinking around producers and consumers, authors and readers, right? And so when I'm thinking about this sort of the landscape of AI moving forward, I think we need to, especially when we think about media representation, I think we need to be aware that people are not just, they may be shaped by common representations, right? If you get enough news stories about how AI is going to take over people's jobs, that becomes the number one concern about AI, within the cultural landscape or something like that. Like repetition matters, representation matters. But I do think that we also need to be very mindful that we have very media literate and media savvy audiences as well. And so that's something that I would sort of throw out there maybe as a closing thought. And then in addition, I would say that increasingly, I think sort of professionalized creative classes and amateur creative classes, which I would put fan cultures and fans in, I think they're going to be grappling with many of the same ethical considerations, labor considerations, over the next 10 years in particular. And so I'm interested to see where we head with that kind of slippage, increased slippage, just post-digital culture generally, but certainly post kind of AI integration, on how these sort of cultural categories that once seemed very firm start to sort of deconstruct over time.
I'd say my closing thoughts are just going to be about how we approach even thinking about AI, because I'll say you guys didn't get the benefit, but we got like a pregame where we all got on Zoom and did the same thing and talked amongst ourselves. And my thoughts on AI evolved because my 4 great colleagues on this panel talking then, and then again did today. A lot of my work is shaped around the idea of decolonizing knowledge and not thinking because I thought a thought or some other people thought a thought that this thought now is, the idea is there's a right or wrong. I was a physicist before I did this, and the magic of physics is, to be totally honest, reality changes depending on who even looks at reality. And I think the same is for understanding what we're even dealing with AI, because I don't have any way to sit up here and tell you where AI is going to be in a year, much less in 20 years. And I think that I have a very pessimistic view from the legal and workers' rights, the things you were just talking about. I feel like that we're going to lose that battle. I say we, assuming all of you think that it would be great if the world was fairer for people. But I think that there's a lot of finances, a lot of entrenched interests that are going to make that a very terrible slope, probably, and jobs will be lost and those things. But I'm going to not make that my hill. I'm going to let someone who's better at organizing labor and people and legality think about it. I'm just going to leave my final thought on conceptually what do we want to do with AI, because it is coming and it is going to evolve. That's a non-negotiable. That's going to happen. So now I think when we use it, when you all use it, when young people use it, the people that are coming up now are the best hope for anything being better. It's not me. It's someone else coming. And I think they need to get up and think, which you should probably do outside of AI as well, and think, what am I doing? And think, why am I doing this? And think, who is doing this? And if you actually bother to ask yourself those questions when you go about life, I think we have a better chance of navigating an evolving beast that we don't know what it's going to look like. So if I left one thought, it's just don't get your answers here today. Keep getting your answers about AI every single day.
So I run a workforce development program with emerging creatives, and we have conversations with them about new trends in the industry. So we recently had a talk with them about AI, and it was such a great conversation. I love listening to younger people talk about it, their thoughts about it, and kind of where it's going and things like that. And I think that those kind of conversations that we have with emerging creatives, those conversations that we have with people in this room are important. Education's important to help demystify new technology and AI, and also to help make it accessible for a larger community of people, and also for the workforce. We talked about jobs and new jobs that may come out of all of this. And so I think these kind of conversations and education is important for all of that.
I guess my final thoughts about AI, I don't want to come off like a doom and gloom, negative. I love it, actually. I think it's fascinating that somebody was able to create this in general. How do you even go about creating something that can create something that can create something. You know what I mean? Like it's just I don't know, but like I think what it's gonna do. I'm more independent mind. Is gonna give smaller development teams and a way of creating bigger and better projects for less, right? Or even just somebody who's an idea person. Yeah, I spent my whole life drawing, learn how to animate and all that, but you don't have to, right? If you're somebody who has an idea, now you could be a creator, right? I think it's great in that aspect. The only concern I have is the job aspect, but I mean, I think if we think about something as simple like YouTube, it's kind of we've kind of been on the hustle generation kind of vibe anyway, where you get a lot more smaller productions. You can get your phone, have an idea, and become a YouTuber tomorrow, generate hundreds of thousands of fans, and now you're a creator of some kind. So I do think it's amazing. Again, I'm just thinking more on like when I'm a professor here, so I'm teaching students how to get a job. You know what I mean? So I have to think about the job aspect. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell y'all right now because, I mean, we can learn how to draw and do all that. But, I mean, when you get out of here in 5 years, it may change, You might not even need that skill anymore. So that's really where the doom and gloom kind of comes from me. But I think overall it's amazing, the medical field. I can't wait to see what advancements come from that. I will be salty if I'm not around to be able to enjoy any of those advancements, But, hopefully the next generation can live longer, healthier lives, all that good stuff. I think AI is like a very great thing. So that's just my doom and gloom thought is just jobs right now. So
Questions from the audience, thoughts? In the middle. Here comes the microphone. Microphone headed your way, hold on.
Hi, my name is Henry Irvin, so maybe you guys can recognize the last name there by looking up at the panel. I'm more of the old school. I back during the times when we came up with robotics, and I hear Jeff talking about maybe AI eliminating jobs. When we were working, and I was a manufacturing engineer, we thought that the robotics would take over jobs. But it didn't happen as fast as we thought it would happen. And then corporations started integrating the robotics into what they did every day. And then they found other jobs. And then through attrition, people would quit, retire, whatever. The robotics kind of filled in the gaps. And then they began to live with it. And that was just a comment. But I had a question as it relates to AI. When I look at AI and what's happening today, because I use ChatGPT myself a little bit in my business that I still do use today, do we believe that at some point in time, and any one of you can answer this, that we will begin to blur the lines a little bit when it gets to copywriting, trademarking, intellectual properties? Will that blur the lines, and will government be able to keep up because the technology is moving so fast? I know today when you look at social media, they can't keep up. They're trying to regulate, but they don't know what to do with it, and it just goes. And when you think in terms of Andrew talking about the technology and what's happening today, and it's moving so fast, will we be able to keep up, and will there be some regulation at some point in time that will help modulate the way that it's going?
In one word, no. I mean, not to be glib or funny, but I mean, no, how could we keep up? I mean, if you guys go on Temu later tonight, you can buy a knockoff of anything right now already being made on Amazon that'll come to your door. As soon as everybody in every house on your street can generate something, how could have regulations ever managed to control everything completely? So I guess my short answer is we got to figure out how to live with it some way, because we're not going to be able to regulate it away.
I think it's going to be really hard to keep up. But what we're seeing now in Hollywood is like sometimes the industry may have to come to a halt, which we saw that happen over the summer with the strike. And so it'll be hard to keep up. But I think that like at this moment now, things may have to stop until we can kind of catch up and regulate and then move forward.
But will people stop? That's my sad, scared.
Some will, some won't.
Yeah, well, I think that's the answer. We'll never stop. Everyone won't stop.
So the New York Times can sue OpenAI for copyright infringement, right? And that's a court case that might be won by the New York Times, but they're in a position where they're well capitalized, they have a lot of lawyers, and OpenAI is a rich target. Well, what happens when the AI production software becomes open source, becomes
Yeah.
easier for everybody to operate, right? Then
Yeah, like
it's-
what happens when, a university takes all of my lectures and all of my social media dad jokes and, and automates. I mean, yeah, so the question starts to become like, who has the means to be involved in that regulation conversation to begin with, I think is an important thing to say. But yeah, I also would say my answer is also no. I think they can try to put things in place, and they clearly are starting to have those conversations, but I think it's going to, the speed that you've been pointing to this entire time, I think is going to be difficult to keep up with.
But the whole conversation is premised on the idea of thought and art as commodities. And maybe the answer is that thought and art can't be commodities in the same way. Maybe the Temu example is great because maybe you just can't keep on charging $600 for a Gucci bag anymore when it was just a bunch of flimsy leather stitched together.
Just a bag to begin with.
With a certain stamp on it, with a certain brand. Maybe that was the thing that was unsupportable. And again, I look at the current mediascape and I wonder about what's AI and what's just making things, making all information assimilated to the same computer archives, right? So that you have the problem in journalism of people's laboriously written articles getting ripped off for podcasts, right? Well, there's no AI in that. There's just the fact that anybody doing a podcast can spin a story that they learned by reading a newspaper, right, without having to pay the newspaper money.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for your conversation. It's really insightful. My name is Mansa, and I am a second-year PhD student in the Department of Radio, Television, Film here at UT. Since we are talking about AI, and this conversation is really insightful, I was thinking how we can reflect back to those other times in the past when these conversations in other forms have taken place in the past and how we can learn from those conversations. For example, going as far back as when human beings were the first computers. And for example, like female employees were hired by NASA to compute for their projects. And in architecture firms, a huge team of individuals were hired as drafters, which was then taken over by the AutoCAD software. And that's how all softwares, in a way, have taken jobs. Since we have learned to live with those softwares, how can we learn from those conversations and those instances and use those arguments here? Thanks.
The historical dimension.
I feel like I'm a broken record on like sadness here, but I mean, I think how we can learn from them is not how we can stop that from happening, but what we can learn is the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So I think we should assume these things are going to happen again. I think, how many of you read a newspaper this morning? Where has journalism gone as newspapers collapsed? I mean, yeah, you could say they're being replaced by online things, but now everyone's getting their news from a TikTok video. Like, what kind of Wild West did we create? Go to Ohio and look where all the jobs used to be. And there's a lot of sad people in towns that don't have those jobs anymore. So I think we should assume that we're not going to stop those jobs from hemorrhaging. We're not going to stop these technologies from changing it. So what we can maybe learn is, how do we create a world that functions without them? Because, I don't know, I hope I'm wrong, but that's my sad answer to the question.
I think we can study and create new jobs. You know, you don't have to wait for that job to be created, but to kind of like study and see where the needs are and become an expert and create a lane for yourself. That's totally new. And we're seeing that happen already with technology. And especially with like kind of VR production and these LED walls and that whole new technology, there are a bunch of jobs that, you know, people come in and they become experts and they're the expert and they're doing that job and there's job security there.
I love your line, just create a lane for yourself. I mean, if we're going to talk about what do people do that AI doesn't do, it's create that lane for yourself. So just, I don't know, I just want to applaud your line.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey.
Hey, what's up? So I just wanted to say Taylor Swift also sold a lot of theater tickets to her concert, so they did see her in real life.
Just didn't pay $1,200 for that ticket.
Yeah. The other question I had is actually kind of more of a general question. So I see AI more of like as a tool if, say, someone, let's say in animation, was creating keyframes and told it to just be an advanced version of creating those in-between frames, right? Do you think there's creativity in someone allowing an AI to create those keyframes? And how do you view that? Like, how do you view, I guess, artistic originality? Do you think AI is going to hurt that? Like, if people just become
I feel like
so
that's very
reliant on
exciting
it?
and good. I mean, I also, I'm pretty doom and gloom, but I don't want to totally vilify machine learning and AI, especially in exactly what you're saying. If a tool can say now, if Joe wants to make an animated film and can't because of budgetary reasons, but now you can because of this tool, I think that's really exciting. I do think that there is a wide open use of what I'm going to call closed system AI. So if I am, and I did this on my new film, if you can all go watch Quantum Cowboys on Amazon Prime and iTunes, I mean, it is actually available. But in some scenes, I did some scenes in there. It's got different types of animations, and one of them I did are really detailed digital paintings that I did, and I used basically machine learning tools to do some of that keyframing for me and some interpolation, and it didn't go out and take from anywhere besides my original drawings. And I do think that that is still. Of course I think that because it's what I did, so also take this with the amount of hypocrisy that it may exist in the exact lines I'm saying, but I felt like I gave it the information. I didn't ask it to go scan the web and take other people's work. I said, I'm going to make this piece of art, and now I'm going to ask you to manipulate my art into these different things. I don't think anyone's going to do ADR in a movie in 5 years because it's very easy for the computer to learn the voices and actually do a better job of ADR. And I think I act as well. And if I go to see a movie that I acted in and they replace 4 of my lines with new AI ADR, I'm not even going to notice. And I think that's fine. I think that's still because it's a closed system of my voice. Now, when I say I don't want to hire Lily Gladstone for my new movie, instead I'm going to buy the download and then she'll narrate my film, I don't know now. Does that answer your question a little?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to kind of know, like, where do you guys personally like draw the line as to when that stops becoming yours and starts becoming AI? I know we touched on it a little.
Yeah, and again, like so much of this is about questions of degree and kind, right? Like there seems to be like what makes me a little bit wary is that we're also going to start to see these kind of hierarchical distinctions being made between what is and is not more human or authentic modes of creative production, right? So like things that are already like very tied to existing technologies. So things like post-production or the example that you gave, right? I mean, I think that those might become devalued in a way that I don't know that I think those things are highly creative, right? And so when we sort of like we create this hierarchical model where like actors may be at the top, right? And then maybe like writers and then maybe, like I find that to be maybe one of the greatest harms that could potentially befall all of this is this sort of like a system in which we are sort of valuing and devaluing work based on how much they are always already tied to emergent technologies or digital technologies in the way that they are doing that work, right? If we're going to talk about labor, you know what I mean? I think we need to also kind of face the idea of what it means to value particular types of labor, creative labor over others.
Just because work was done by humans, to go back to the deep historical vantage point that was called for earlier, just because work was done by humans doesn't mean that it wasn't rote work, right? And in entertainment, right, back in the days of, let's say, MGM, classic Hollywood cinema, MGM musicals, like Gold Diggers of 1933, which are all movies about people putting on stage shows, right? And in every one, there's a Bing Crosby, right? Because you couldn't get an AI to reproduce Bing Crosby, but you had to have a person doing an exact knockoff of Bing Crosby because that's what was popular then. And in a weird way, people were doing the work, but partly in a way that was influenced by an aesthetic of mechanical reproduction. The work was to like exactly imitate, a style of performance, right? Whereas in the emergent AI world, young influencers, right, all want to be different, right? So there's a tremendous heterogeneity in the entertainment world, right? That's in part driven by the relative ease of getting your thing out there. So there are these like paradoxes around what actually unfolds that are worth noting.
How you doing? I have a software background, so I kind of have a technical understanding of what's going on under the hood, but I absolutely do not have an art background. So I'm kind of want to do an interpretation and get a feel if am I completely misunderstanding the art side of this thing. So earlier you brought up the scenario of a painting on one side and AI paint on the other. Can we tell the difference? Who cares? But there does seem to be something in art where, yes, everyone's been doing a Bing Crosby impersonation, but then someone does something new, right? I'm a rap fan, so I remember listening. The first time I heard Kendrick Lamar, I was like, that's new. First time I heard Lupe, that's new. We're in Texas, so the first time I heard DJ Michael Watts, I was like, that's new. So there's something about the newness of art that seems to be human. And my understanding of the math is they can't do new. It's very much injecting in, I'm gonna do pattern matching of what I've already seen. And I'm curious in y'all's world, A, like, am I misinterpreting that? But then B, assuming I'm onto something there, in y'all's world, does that place a premium on newness? Like to be, to have a new style of animation, a new style of painting, or does it not matter because the second you do something new, AI is gonna copy it anyways?
Great question.
For the whole table.
I'm trying to think of like, okay. I mean, that's a good point though. Like, thinking about art and new being like a premium thing. But I always feel like art is imitation anyway, for the most part. I mean, I don't think you get new all the time anyway. Like, I mean, you do, right? But a lot of like, even just think about hip hop in itself. I mean, how much of it is really new? Like, a lot of it is taking music from back in the day and taking samples and looping and they rap, and that in itself could be a new form. But I mean, I just think that new is great, but it's kind of like, I don't really think that, like, as far as an art, like, I don't feel like I create anything new. I feel like I create cool stuff, but it's nothing new and like groundbreaking, I would say.
Maybe different is the word to use.
Different.
Yeah.
I don't know, like, because when I create, I don't think about trying to create, and yeah, like, yeah, I want it to be original in my way, I guess, right? Original as far as like I'm taking influences from these things and doing it my own interpretation, I guess. But yeah, the new thing, I don't know. How do you feel? I mean, I think because you're.
I mean, I'm going to do just what you did and replace new with a different word, but I'm going to actually agree with you, and I'm going to replace new with exciting. And I think because you said, that's new, it wasn't just that you hadn't seen it before. It was that it sparked something in you, right? That's why you felt like that's new. So what is new? I don't know. But I do think there's going to continue to be value on something that makes a person out there, a fan, feel engaged and feel like you want more of that thing. You want to explore that. And that could even be something that someone else copied from somewhere else, but it hadn't talked to you in the way that did at that moment. I think it's still going to have, I'm going to agree with you and say it's still going to have value.
Yeah, I think it's such an important question, and I love the framing of it. And I also would just say what's interesting is it feels like the entertainment industry, or like at least the mainstream Hollywood entertainment industry, has primed itself now for several decades where this is not going to be a problem, right? We're several decades into reboot culture. We're several decades into sort of utilizing and maximizing our intellectual property, right? And a lot of this is about recycling to a degree, and the idea that audiences, to some extent, want recycled. So to put a separate point on Jeff's, yes, that moment of excitement, I think we've all felt it when we've seen a piece of entertainment media that is doing something distinct or different or exciting or new. But there is also a presumption, I think, on the industrial side that many audiences are very content to have things just be recycled over and over again ad nauseum. Now, fans, for better and for worse, have pushed back on this notion quite a bit, right? On the one hand, they have single-handedly propped up the MCU for many years, right? And on the other, they demand, certain cuts of movies, or they have often, either misogynist or racist responses to things once they've tried to change existing IP into something new, right? So female Ghostbusters, no thank you, right? For a certain segment of that audience. So I think what's interesting to me is that the industry and the industrial structure we have right now seems primed to be okay with that repetition. More of the same, right?
That's actually a great point.
But so like structurally, I think I think audiences are a different story, right? I do think that audiences do want something new, something exciting, something different. One of my favorite quotes about fan culture comes from Henry Jenkins, and it's like, I think we think of fans often as just like avid consumers who will consume anything under a kind of specific genre or corporate banner or franchise or whatever. But with fandom comes like this mix of fascination, but also frustration. Fans are constantly looking for new, different, better, or they wouldn't be going to write fan fiction and making their own fan art, right? So like, I do think that maybe this is an audience-driven thing. I think the corporate structure of Hollywood means that like, they'll be okay with that, right? Until the Kendrick Lamar comes along and sells a bunch of records and goes on solo concert tours, and then suddenly that's the new thing that they're looking to replicate, right? So I think that maybe this needs to be more of a consumer-driven question than maybe a corporate Hollywood-driven question.
Definitely consumer-driven, and I think we all like something that's like a game changer, right? Like those artists that you mentioned are like game changers, and I think there is premium on that. But thinking about like Hollywood was having issues because of authenticity, and that they weren't seeing a lot of profit because they were trying to bring in like new voices and an original work, something to kind of sell more. So Hollywood already kind of had some issues, and it was related to authenticity. So I think there is kind of a premium on something that's like, I would characterize as being like a game changer.
It's interesting because one of the main places that we see AI intervening in entertainment is with recommender systems, right? The system that says, here's your next Amazon book, or here's the next song coming on Spotify to you. And so that's curation, right? That's something that's happening maybe between the fan level, the side of consumption and the side of production. And curation is a very important part of entertainment and the arts that we see is susceptible to AI. We like to kind of romanticize it and think, hip hop culture owes so much to like DJ Red Alert, the great curators of hip hop in years past. But in entertainment, a lot of curation was driven by payola and by nepotism and by friend networks, right? Like the ideal that we have of curation, maybe is an ideal we can question. And sometimes you can see AI and recommender systems as something that might be, it might be like formally awesome and innovative, that you're going to hear something with like the, like the same tempo and, kind of general, musical signature is what you like. And so you'll hear something without somebody having to, buy its way into your attention.
I also think it's about what narratives we tell, though, right? Because like the very famous narrative of like data collection being used to algorithmically drive like the creation of content is like Netflix's House of Cards, right? Going back to the oldest versions of this, right? Where it's like, well, we saw people like David Fincher and we saw people like Kevin Spacey, and they seem to like this political drama from across the pond, and we're gonna make House of Cards. House of Cards choose success, right? Nobody's ever talking about Hemlock Grove. that was a flop. It was driven by the same kind of basic model, right? And so, like, I also think we need to think about sort of like the cases where things like do hit and are popular, or like seem to have like a moment of excitement around them, and the things that are then failures kind of get erased from the historical narrative in ways that I think are troublesome.
They might be both.
Not even the name of that show. I don't even remember. It was that bad. My student is
yeah.
nodding, so yes, that was the name of that show. Okay.
But yeah, new and like sometimes exciting supplants what also might have been new and just not exciting.
Do you see any parallel? Oh, take it. Do you see any parallel between AI and technologies like auto-tune and Photoshop? Because I remember when they were introduced, it was the end of the world. No one was ever going to be able to, need to sing again. And now these are common tools.
Yeah, I mean, I actually kind of do. Yeah, I mean, I think there is a parallel. And I mentioned Photoshop being like there was a debate about Photoshop before, and then it's kind of like just a part of everyday life now. The thing about, I guess the thing about AI is that like with Photoshop, you still had to learn the software. You still had to have a designer's eye or something, to create whatever it is that you're creating. It did replace certain jobs on, certain aspects of graphic design or animation or whatever it is that you're creating. But it did still require heavy human interaction to produce anything.
What was shocking to me is we're doing a Photoshop assignment in my class right now, and the way that Photoshop is pushing their generative AI as like the first, like the minute you open anything, it's like, well, do you just want to automatically generate this, right? And so for me, like I also think a lot about sort of like platforms and the ways in which like interfaces like push us towards particular creative decisions. So I completely agree with your point, but I'm also like, this is also how, as Photoshop evolves, to what degree are they going to be sort of stressing, like, look at all the creative flexibility that you have to manipulate and remix and mash up images and create something new out of those elements, and how much of it's just going to be like, you could just generate it, like it's like so there's a bit of that happening too with some of these platforms that I think is interesting.
Well, you mentioned auto-tune and Photoshop, and at one point, like, I'm not a great singer, but if I sang an auto-tuned, I gave it a closed system again. I gave it my voice and said, now make me hit an A sharp. And in where we're going with some of this would be like, okay, I'm not even going to sing it. I'm going to ask you to give me a beautiful voice that does that. And, with Photoshop, I did a drawing and I added color and I blurred it and I did whatever in Photoshop versus where Photoshop is now, which is like, just give me a desert. And so I don't know. I think there's a parallels, but I think we hit this spot where it's getting easier for it not to be the closed system, and instead it's reaching out and just grabbing from the universe.
Two last questions, right here and here.
Thanks. I wanted to ask about enshittification and profit maximization on the one hand, and then this sort of problem of revealed preferences on the other, because I mean, it strikes me that yet another complicating factor here, and possibly a fatally complicating factor on some of these issues is, there's been a lot of talk today about what audiences or what fans or what customers want or respond to, or whether people will continue to value authenticity, or whether little kids like the fake Peppa Pig just as much. But all of our experience as consumers in the 21st century tells us that whether we like something more doesn't have all that much bearing all the time on whether it's what we get anyway, right? I mean, we all are getting force-fed sort of like video news online that we don't prefer, but that allows more ad maximization, so that's how we're getting it anyway, and we're stuck with it because it's a monopolized system. I think there's a sort of entertainment world creative question parallel to that, and I think it goes beyond the sort of, well, it used to be payola and now it's algorithmically driven. Whether our responses as listeners, as customers, as viewers, really play as big a role as some of these answers imply in where the industry and the art goes.
That's a good question.
I think so much of this is, again, about like the narrative that is told by industry about we're giving the people what they want, right? Like that is a powerful discursive tool that predates the digital era, that predates, right? We're giving the people what they want. I think that, you know, one of the benefits of sort of digitally networked cultures, and, you know, again, I'm coming at this from the fan studies perspective, but I think just in general, right, is that there is an opportunity to sort of speak back in more systematized ways to those kinds of representational decisions, right, than we historically had in a pre-digital kind of like analog consumer, you know, I mean, it would be like send your mail to Warner Brothers, right, as opposed to like organizing a campaign on something like X or on Instagram or something like that. Yeah. And I'm not overstating the power of that at all. And in fact, I think you're absolutely right that we're not going to necessarily be able to shape what we're getting anyways, right? I do think that narrative has a certain, I mean, it's a representation matters thing, right? That narrative has a certain amount of traction in terms of like public beliefs around we're getting what we asked for, when in fact we're not, and we never have been. But I have to believe that there's ways that we can sort of learn from activist communities, community organizers, to at least like speak back more effectively to those various systems of power. I have to believe that, or otherwise then like what? We just all crumble into oblivion. I don't know. It's too, here's my dystopian version. I get to be dystopian once on this panel. My dystopian version of this is that they're starting to use facial recognition to do test audience screenings. So instead of like having people talk to a human being afterwards and say, okay, here's what I liked and here's what I didn't, and the end is terrible, etc., we are now moving into an era where people's like small facial tics and mannerisms will then be interpreted as data as to whether or not, like, and again, like, are we going to get more of what we ask for under that model or less? I genuinely don't know the answer to that question, but it is unnerving to me because I think the answer is less and not more.
Didn't someone earlier ask if there was going to be a premium on live in-person events? Who asked that question? Did I imagine that? Somebody did, right? No, I didn't ask it. Somebody asked that, but
It was a hybrid.
but
It was a hybrid.
it was you. But I think one answer to your question is, again, yes, there's going to be a premium on that. I mean, buy physical media. There's my first answer to go in the face of this, and I think people are. I mean, I've been teaching college students for 22 or 23 years, and over the last year and a half, I've seen more of them wanting Blu-rays and wanting records. I mean, everybody rebels a little bit against whoever was like 8 or 9 years ahead of them because we just know better every 8 or 9 years, whatever. It's a thing we do. We want to define ourselves. So that could be part of people's desire for, I mean, there's the New York Times articles on kids buying flip phones and whatever. But buy physical media. Go see the music the people down the street are making, because I do think that the algorithm is not going to give you what you wanted, but somebody you know might give you what you wanted. And I do think that there's a world where, will that mean those things exist on a large scale and are everywhere? Probably not. But it can still be found, and maybe we could be okay. In fact, it might even be great if you were in Houston and you could see music that you can only see in Houston, and then you're in Denver and you can see music or hear music that's only made in Denver. Maybe there's a premium on that in the future.
Yeah. I mean,
that's a question. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that's a good point. There's so many content creators, so you could get what you're looking for through kind of other content creators. When it comes to kind of the big studio system, it might take longer for you to get what you want because people are concerned about job security and they're less likely to take risk.
Thank you. My question is more of a career-driven one. So, with all the changes going on in AI, for an AI ethicist, what are some of the areas that that person should be paying attention to? Sort of creating your own lane, if you will.
I was going to say just continuing to follow the trends, continuing to read, have conversations, go to talks like this to just kind of stay up on what's happening, what's developing, and continuing to like learn and study. And with our workforce development program, I'm always on the lookout for kind of new jobs that are popping up, new opportunities, so that we can offer that training. So we at AFS we're a training facility, so we offer like access to studio space, cameras, and all sorts of things. So we're constantly paying attention to what's happening so that we can add a class or add a workshop to make sure that people are work ready or job ready.
So a major ambition of the Good Systems program here at UT has been to train AI ethicists with the presumption that there would be such jobs. And for many years there were, right? But as many of you know, in the recent rounds of tech layoffs, many of the first people to go have been the people at some of these major platforms whose job it has been to issue and monitor ethical guidelines, right? To be watching trends and then asking, oh, we see that there are these problems with moderation at this other platform. Do we have these problems with moderation? How can we avoid that? It seemed like that was going to be a future career, and now it seems like, well, I'll put it this way. It is now clear that there are certain platforms whose leadership adamantly does not want that to be a
Are you telling
career,
us that the
right?
first jobs to go are the people you hired to tell you how you couldn't make as much money as possible? I'm
Exactly,
shocked.
exactly. So, so then the question becomes, well, will this void be filled by regulators? Will the government, right, intervene? Will there be a new kind of public interest consumerism that says, hey, these platforms are becoming shitty. This is the technical phrase, shittification that was raised earlier, right? And we're going to boycott them. Is that going to happen, or is it possible that we will be able to kind of shame and cajole major tech companies, to look out for tech ethics in general and for AI ethics in particular? It's still very much an open question, but it's just worth raising pointing out that it is an issue, and it's an issue that we struggle with as teachers, because we want we want to say to our students, hey, if you learn about these issues, right, you can actually have a voice in improving them. Well, that depends on our industry partners wanting to go forward with that conversation. It's very much a work in progress that people should know is a process that could go either way. And that's just what I see in this position at UT. Well, I've brought the room to to a contemplative place, but I want us all to have an exciting few minutes to network and talk among ourselves and make those connections. Industry folks, meet a student who might come and work on AI for you in an ethical way, but also a highly profitable way, because there are many of those in the room. But first of all, I want to thank our fantastic panel for all these great thoughts and stories.